Hello, and thank you for joining us for this provocation in the form of a poetry reading. I will read four or so poems and hopefully prompt further conversation through their introductions. 1. Shibboleth. To begin with, my relationship to water was formed in ways that have everything to do with the country that I come from, one which is primarily desert and which in turn has named its currency, the Botswana Pula, after rain. Of course, as I've moved further in the world, my relationship to water and all my other preoccupations has been shaped by many of the things that I've learnt along the way, some of which lie entangled at the intersections of politics and the environment. Perhaps in particular, how we make water complicit in our border building by working hard to keep the supposed other out and off what we imagine to be our waters and our land. As to the poem's title, but not necessarily its narrative, in the biblical book of Judges, we meet the inhabitants of Gilead, who have just defeated the invading tribe of Ephraim. The surviving Ephraimites try to cross the river Jordan back into their home territory, but the Gileadites, having secured the river's fjords, tell each suspected survivor to say the word shibboleth. The Ephraimite dialect resulted in a pronunciation that to the Gileadites sounded like Sibboleth. They slaughter the survivors. Shibboleth. What trap awaits us, I think I know. You cannot have one without the other. Belonging creates unbelonging. And so much seems intent on separation. Somewhere between body and blood, something remains as a good fence, or colour at the shaver's sink. My father's face, unshaven, all these weeks at sea, shifts the bodies of posture, the way you lean a face over seething water to sweat the sick out of you. This is for the devout drowned, whose tongues lick tangled seaweed, who rise beautiful from some ocean floor, with the wakefulness of a clean face, the soused in white wet robes on the shore when everywhere else is the river Jordan. Before we pull any or all 880 out of the sea, they must say water, swallow the slosh of a soft R, the imagined ridge of a letter D in place of the water's dry T. 1, 2. The Parable of the Tree. In her book Self-Devouring Growth, Julie Livingston thinks about Botswana and development and the ways in which parables proffer meaning and metaphor. Livingston writes, and I quote, "Parable is a realist genre." She goes on to say, in a parable, we travel out, unfolding the metaphor in a parabolic shape. By journey's end, we will have returned to the same plane on which we started, but somewhat farther along, in the hopes of having learnt something from our experience along the way. End quote. Retrospectively speaking, which is perhaps all I can do as a poet, looking back at my own work, in the following poem, what I wanted to think about was consequence, entanglement, and witness. The Parable of the Tree begins with an epigraph pulled from Le Monde on the 7th of May 2013. The maximum permissible CO2 limit was crossed just before 1990. The Parable of the Tree. This is not a forest, no, it is a tree, and then another, in which a chipmunk lives his whole life unknowing that there is a matter concerning earth and man and why the forest is suddenly at a crossroads. Why should he not pick fruit from the troubled tree when it is not he who troubles the tree? It, with its bounty of fruit, in him no pocket, only a cheek full of nuts, while his neighbour, whose field is a basket of gold, parades his gaiety in these woods. Say, say the tree is only a tree. What makes air for the man who closes his eyes to what falls in the forest, who holds his breath longer than the thud of a falling oak? Tell the man who cuts off his own ear, as though it were wheat, that what he has summoned has finally come. 1, 2, 3. Mutineer. In her absolutely gorgeous must-read study of Black and anti-colonial methodologies, Dear Science, Catherine McKittrick writes, if we are committed to anti-colonial thought, our starting point must be one of disobedient relationality that always questions and thus is not beholden to normative academic logics. This means our method making may not necessarily take us where we want to go, but it will take us, as Glissant writes, to an unknown that does not terrify, end quote. And perhaps this notion of productive uncertainty and disobedience is comforting to those of us who, because of gender or race or class, have had to find alternative ways to make and receive and have our knowledges acknowledged. This very, very short poem is, in my mind, a celebration of disobedience. Mutineer. I have been spotted spreading one leg toward the light, so they come for me, while I am naked as desert sand, wet behind ear. I am rain between thighs. I am forest growing everything anew. I am sand slipping away the fullness of youth. I have grown gills in the name of a storm coming. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Poetry is often a struggle in chasing the language of music and yet wanting the meaning or meanings to be clear at the same time. And I've begun to think about the ways in which didacticism can be productive. It's fair, I think, to say that heavy-handed moralizing rarely, if ever, serves good storytelling. And perhaps it even shows a lack of faith in the reader or listener that is in their ability to extrapolate imaginatively. And that is never my intention. But I want to say what I mean in this poem and mean what I say in as precise a manner as is open to me as a poet. I hope to delight, yes, but perhaps most importantly, to share what little instruction has been shared with me. Because in the end, as Catherine Youssef reminds us in A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, and I quote, the Anthropocene might seem to offer a dystopic future that laments the end of the world, but imperialism and ongoing settler colonialisms have been ending worlds for as long as they have been in existence, end quote. And so I wonder, what might we learn if we listened to those whose histories of loss and terror and, yes, accomplishment, and whose knowledges we undervalue or undermine or consider biological or inherent, imprecise, and therefore not worthy of archive? This final poem, Bread for the Birds, is grappling with a great many subjects and themes and preoccupations, but it also, I hope, is about listening and listening well. Bread for the Birds. It rose above us like a god, and I remember thinking, who or what would willingly give wings to such rage? But there it was, and so a benefactor must exist. Somewhere behind this communal mirror glass, a huge, angry, beastly cloud of a thing is setting its course. and likening it to mine and yours. I remember seeing the sky as it scrunched its face, filling its cheeks with smoke and hurling rage at every man's door, at life's very factory gate, huffing and puffing till it ceased, sneezed, pouring citrus rain upon us. Yet none of us, no, not one of us, knew what to call it. And since that day, it always seems as though, no matter what we do, for each birth, we must give away one more than we will receive. For each tended, perhaps 5 daughters will be born to remind us how we should have held on to what we had before fortune called, before tomorrow was gone. For we are but bread for the birds, dead before our very breath is heard. Light as lead feathers lost to the wind, we sink in a quagmire of our own making. And to look at us now, we are but jaded shopkeepers with nothing left to sell, merchants charmed into a blindfolded trade against the merciless rage and the machines. They do not even care whether we live or die. This war to them is nothing personal. In this war to them, we are the ones on a fool's errand. And in this gingerbread man existence, we think ourselves gods. We are changing things, breaking things, to live as kings, leaving costly crumbs wherever we go. Yet you and I are but bread for the birds. We are the baker and the baked. Our deeds name us the sly fox, and still we are running as fast and as far as we can from these facts and ourselves. And when our turn upon this wheel is done, our sons, our daughters into this chaos will run, and they will mourn the authors of their demise with a truth as sincere as a lie. While the air turns their gaze putrid with inherited greed, with the loss of everything green, they will have become the perfect puppeteers, industrial dream. For we are none of us, the light beams we should have become, none of us, it seems, example, what we were meant to become, beacons in a world with only so much sun. And when the summer does not an end seem to find, when the ice crackles quiet against your feet of clay, will you know then the sound of death coming? It is not loud or crass. The earth will not crash upon itself merely to warn you of your folly. The wind will no longer howl its protest at the closed window of your soul. And when hot becomes the new cold, will we remember what the prophets of old foretold, how they spoke of an ungrateful tribe turning a king's providence into a tomb? You and I are but bread for the birds, my friend. But if by some small chance you are a voice dissident amidst the fury, they will ask you who you think you are, to find your own right when everyone else is left behind. Tell them you know your castle is made of sand and air, that you are a thing alone, fragile, breakable, exposed in this roofless fort. And that nameless thing that started it all, it was us all along.